Your teen's success in treatment and their ability to make changes starts with you and your ability to create a validating and change-ready environment at home. When your teen gets triggered, it often feels like they are on fire with their own emotions. Think about that for a second, feeling like you are all consumed and on fire with your emotions. When we think about it that way, it tends to make sense that a teen's impulsive or self-destructive behaviors are actually a solution to being on fire with their emotions. Their brain resources a way to regulate the pain that burns inside of them. And oftentimes an emotion flares up, the behavior makes the emotion go down. And so what I want you to know as a caregiver is that all behaviors are transactional. Think about your relationship with your teen and each of your behaviors like a dance. When they step back, you step forward. If you don't want your teen to step back, you need to learn to stop stepping forward and learn a different way of initiating behaviors or responding to behaviors. Your teen's behaviors influence yours, and your reactions influence their behavior. So oftentimes your reactions are your solution, right? So if you're angry, you yell, that regulates your anger and your anger goes down. If you're anxious, maybe you are prying for information or trying to find your teen's journal to get that information because you think having that information is going to make your anxiety go down. Your brain resources a way to regulate your teen or to regulate yourself. So I want you to think about some of the common caregiver reactions. I'm going to go over them in a moment and reflect on your teen's mood and behavior. Think about what your teen does and what that triggers in you, and whether or not that triggers a helpful or unhelpful response or behavior from your teen. Let's look at some of these common behaviors. Oftentimes when we see teens who are acting out, who are what some people would call like oppositional or defiant or disrespectful, all judgment words that are unhelpful, by the way, we tend to see parents who are angry or who blame. So think about when you act out in anger, when you criticize, when you yell at your teen, is this helpful or unhelpful? What does this behavior trigger in your teen? If you're not seeing the results that you want, this is something we want to target in the treatment process to help you find a new way to initiate behavior or respond to behavior so that you can see a different behavior in your teen. A lot of parents tend to move towards self-blame, which is shame or hopelessness or helplessness, all feelings that make total sense. When your teen is struggling, you are struggling. It hurts to see someone you love so much, especially your child, in so much pain. And that can often lead to your own sadness and grief and depression. This is not the life you imagined for yourself or your teen, and yet it's the life that you have right now. And so if this is part of what you're experiencing, it's important to consider, what does this look like? How is this impacting my ability as a caregiver to be effective? And maybe this means looking at things like, what are my natural support systems? Where can I seek support outside of what's happening with my teen? Where can I build out my own self-care or my own hobbies, as challenging as that is? Because I know that when your teen is struggling, it is difficult to think about anything else. And it oftentimes is the impulse as parents to say, when they get better, I will shift my focus. But what happens is you're actually engaging in the same mood dependent behavior that your teen is. When they're sad, when they're anxious, they're acting on their emotions rather than acting towards their goals. So parents go first. We need you to demonstrate that you're able to exhibit goal-directed behavior rather than mood-dependent behavior. And this means using certain skills when shame or hopelessness, helplessness, grief, depression show up for you as a parent. Oftentimes we see parents who are anxious or fearful. And again, this makes sense if your teen is engaging in behaviors that are life-threatening or self-destructive. And so there are a couple things that happen with fear. We can either avoid, we can walk on eggshells to try not to trigger our teen, or we can snoop or pry for information or make efforts to control the situation so that it doesn't continue to happen. I'd venture to say that none of them on their own are completely effective, but what I'd like you to do is start to consider, What am I doing that's influencing my teen? The good news here is that you and your behaviors are one of the biggest predictors of treatment success for your teen. So you can influence your teen's behavior with your behaviors. So my challenge for you is to choose some targets for you to work on. What does it look like for you? When your teen is having a panic attack, what do you do? Is it helping them? Is it not helping them? If it's not helping them, let's make that a target. Maybe you're rushing in and reassuring and bringing them ginger ale, and it's only reinforcing that this is a way of behaving that gets your teen's needs met, but it's actually not helpful for them in the long run. So let's look at what you're doing and how you can shift those behaviors to influence what's happening with your teen. We'll look at what your goals are for the future, what you'd like to be happening, what you'd like to see in your teen, and then what you can do to facilitate that process. So I want you to think of it this way. Right now, you and your teen are on this side of the river. You want to be on this side of the river. There's a big gap in between. And so what your teen's therapist is doing is they're putting stepping stones between this side of the river and this side of the river. And they are the skills and interventions that are happening in sessions with your teen and their therapist. What your job is to figure out what you can do to best support your teen in crossing the river safely. Maybe that means that you need a therapist to work with you on stepping stones from one side of the river to the other. Maybe it means that you need to learn strategies to cheerlead your teen along the way, validate the difficulty, talk them through getting from this side of the river to this side of the river. And also, maybe it means that you need to regulate yourself and stop saying things like, be careful, don't fall, it's really cold in that river, and your anxiety is actually making them more anxious and making it more difficult for them to cross the river. So my point here is, again, all behaviors influence other behaviors. And if you think about what you're doing that's either triggering your teen or reinforcing behaviors that aren't helpful, it really creates a lot of hope and opportunity because it gives you the blueprint for how do I shift my responses to support my teen in making it towards their goals.